You're listening to Arsenal for Democracy, episode 403, recorded on Sunday, December 12th, 2021. I'm your host, Bill Humphrey. Joining me online from Idaho, as always, is Rachel. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, Bill.
Last week on the show, we talked about bungalow houses taking off in the 1910s and 1920s, mostly due to new financial products to assist home buyers. But we also discussed how falling materials costs and mass production of parts helped reduce that cost to home buyers and tended to make a lot of bungalow housing look very similar apart from custom flair. This week we're jumping forward another half century to look at a specific material that has greatly influenced the past 50 years of building construction, PVC. But to start, we need to go back in time first to see its emergence out of the Second Industrial Revolution. So for that, let's go to Rachel.
All right, so polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, was an 1830s invention, also later invented in the 1870s. We'll talk more about that later. But that didn't really take off until later in the 20th century. So as a background, we've already talked about vinyl a little bit in our March 2021 music industrialization episode about vinyl records and the early mass application of PVC. And we also talked on our transatlantic telegraph cable episode in April 2021 about the challenges of installing durable undersea waterproof cables before plastic vinyl insulation. So our story begins, peculiarly in two separate years, 1838 and 1872, when French physicist Henri Victor Regnault and German chemist Eugen Baumann, respectively, discovered PVC for the first and second times. Neither really followed up on the breakthrough, but on both occasions, the polymer materialized as a, quote, white solid within flasks filled with vinyl chloride gas. Following these independent discoveries, no one actually mastered the use of PVC in commercial applications. This was due to the chemical properties of PVC. It has a really inert nature. It doesn't react with other chemicals, and a very rigid structure, which gives it kind of a brittle structure to it. So there wasn't really a use for it until 1913, when a German inventor by the name of Friedrich Heinrich August Klatte decided to take out the first patent on the material. His polymerization method of vinyl chloride used sunlight, and over the next few decades, companies around the world began experimenting where Klatte's patent seemed to leave off. So fast forward to 1926, Waldo Semin, a scientist with the B.F. Goodrich Company in Akron, Ohio, finally found a practical use for PVC. The company directed Semin to find a way to bond rubber with metal. After trying numerous other substances, Semin tested PVC, and after adding various substances to PVC, Semin succeeded in creating a flexible, waterproof, and fire-resistant plastic that could bond to metal as well as be formed into products by itself. So today, PVC is the second most used plastic in the world, with manufacturers producing nearly 44 billion pounds per year. Retail sale of PVC earns producers a combined $20 billion per year, and more than 50% of PVC manufactured today is used in construction materials, especially pipes and window frames. And other uses for PVC include credit cards and vinyl records. So around the early 20th century, B.F. Goodrich hired industrial scientist Waldo Semin to develop a novel synthetic alternative for the increasingly expensive natural rubber. And we talked about rubber and synthetic rubber in an episode in April 2021. And all the links to our previous episodes will be included in the show notes for this episode. So polyvinyl chloride experiments were started, but the project was soon threatened by the recession of 1920. That's when Semin had an incredible idea, using PVC as a water-resistant coating for fabrics. Soon enough, sales of the material rapidly took off, with demand peaking at the start of World War II, when PVC was adopted as an insulator for wiring on military ships. So kind of the key development in the use of PVC was the addition of plasticizers. And plasticizers were first introduced to PVC by the B.F. Goodrich Company in 1930. And so these plasticizers, when processed with PVC, create a flexible polymer. And the more plasticizer added to the PVC, the lower the temperature that PVC can maintain flexibility. So these technological breakthroughs really unlocked the usefulness of PVC and helped PVC become the material powerhouse it is today, which is a durable material able to withstand a wide range of temperatures without degradation. And today, almost 90% of plasticizers used in production go into PVC production.
In 1930, the Union Carbide Corporation introduced the trademarked polymer vinylite, a copolymer of vinyl chloride and vinyl acetate that became the standard material of LP or long-playing phonograph records. And that's quoting from Britannica. As always, the sources, as Rachel alluded to, will be listed out at arsenalfordemocracy.com in a PDF accompanying this episode, which is episode 403. And so far, we've been quoting from, in addition to the Britannica item and referencing our own past episodes, we've been looking at some sort of corporate history type documents from companies like Piper Plastics and a number of other similar companies that we'll mention as we go through. And there's also some articles on places like ohiohistorycentral.org and so forth, given the connection to Ohio history with the Goodrich work that Rachel already mentioned. Now, in addition to the United States, there was another significant competitor in the field of developing PVC, and that brings us back around to Germany, which, as Rachel said, was the source of modern useful PVC, or at least the first round of implemented PVC in 1913. That was shortly before World War I, right? And now we're talking about Germany in the post-World War I era, either the Weimar era or then the Nazi era and World War II sanctions. They were obviously pretty interested in getting more synthetic resources because they didn't have access to rubber plantations around the world, and they were cut off from, either through their colonies being taken away after World War I or the wartime sanctions. So they were hard at work trying to figure out all kinds of synthetic materials. And we talked about like synthetic rubber and things like that on that episode, as Rachel mentioned. But they were continuing to work on trying to develop and improve PVC to make it a more useful technology. By 1932, the first tubes made from and this is quoting from J.M. Eagle, which is another corporate history page on this. By 1932, the first tubes made from a PVC copolymer were produced. Nearly 3 years later, the first PVC pipes were produced using a roll mill and a hydraulic extruder. This two-step process involved melting the PVC powder on a roll mill and rolling the sheet up to a billet. The PVC could then be processed in a discontinuously working ram extruder to make pipe. This process was adapted from that used for celluloid and was really ill-fitted for PVC. As a result, the products were often of dubious quality. Nevertheless, these early PVC pipes were deemed suitable for drinking water supply piping and wastewater piping because of their chemical resistance, lack of taste or odor, and smooth interior surface. From 1936 to 1939, over 400 residences were installed with PVC drinking water and waste pipelines in central Germany, basically to test this out. Various test pipelines of PVC were laid in Leipzig, Dresden, Magdeburg, Berlin, Hamburg, Cologne, Heidelberg, and Wiesbaden during the period of 1936 to 1941. Both the pipelines for chemicals and those for water supply and wastewater came up to expectations, as did test pipelines in the cities mentioned above, apart from damage caused by World War II. The PVC pipes installed in central Germany are still in use today without any major problems. So that was basically tested through about 1941, and toward the end of the 1940s, PVC piping arrived in North America, and the U.S. began deploying PVC pipes in 1952. According to sewerhistory.org, they are now a major part of sewer and water infrastructure, and I've linked to a PDF that goes through pretty exhaustive detail tracking different developments in the use of PVC piping for sewer and water infrastructure, particularly in rural areas because it was so inexpensive, but it was considered reliable. I also took a quick look at the Vinyl Institute, which is the official lobbyist organization of all the producer companies in the United States. I was just curious to see what they said. And they noted that they at least claim to represent a U.S. vinyl industry encompassing nearly 3,000 vinyl manufacturing facilities with more than 350,000 employees and an overall economic value of $54 billion. So this is obviously a pretty significant industry at this point in the United States and has been for quite some time, which of course leads us to the other significant sort of commercial use, right? We've talked about things like LP phonograph records. We've talked about piping, which is how a lot of people know about PVC. But there is a lot of PVC around us that is typically just referred to as vinyl, in this case, vinyl siding and other sort of home construction uses. Vinyl siding is sort of important for us to understand aesthetically within the United States because it's all around us now and is sort of part of the landscape for the past 50 years. It's a very distinctive look that started slowly in the 1950s, but especially took off since the 1970s. And it kind of shapes the look of housing in the U.S. and Canada. It's not as common in other countries. There are similar or related technologies, but that really distinctive sort of vinyl plastic clapboard siding on houses was originally devised as a substitute for either wood clapboard or aluminum siding. Aluminum siding itself had been kind of a metal replacement for wood clapboard. And the latter, aluminum siding, is most closely emulated visually by the PVC or vinyl siding. Since the 1970s, it has been more colorful and more resistant to ultraviolet fading. The industry also consolidated significantly in that period in the 1970s with the arrival of new production methods that had been necessitated by stronger workplace requirements and protections for PVC factory workers who were starting to develop rare cancers. It's supposedly relatively hard to make vinyl siding on houses catch on fire, which is an important consideration in densely packed housing tracts and especially with growing wildfire seasons. But unfortunately, once it's on fire, PVC is quite hazardous, especially to firefighters, due to the toxins that are coming out of it. And that can even be an issue before it actually catches on fire. But it is, again, something that's pretty significant in our sort of landscape in the United States and Canada now. I just drove past today a set of condos that were built in, I think, the 1980s. And I was looking and, like, it's definitely vinyl. And there's a very sort of distinctive color palette that goes with that, especially for that early period when they were kind of starting to make them a little bit more colorful, but they weren't going like super crazy with it. And it is like basically under the processes developed around the 1970s and implemented then, as opposed to some earlier uses of vinyl siding. The color is like part of the manufacturing process. It's put in, so it's you can't really change the color once it's there. And again, it's kind of a specific set of often pastels, that kind of thing. And you now see that also with some of the other sort of competitors in terms of siding, like cedar, engineered cedar board siding, like composite type products. They also tend to use a lot of pastels. But that vinyl siding is just such a distinctive sort of visual aesthetic texture and also color scheme. So go back to the Piper Plastics history. By the 1950s, PVC production was soaring around the world. 5 companies in particular started testing out revolutionary uses for vinyl PVC, finding new applications for the material in inflatable structures and fabric coatings. So if you're wondering about vinyl clothing, now you have that part of the puzzle as well. The construction industry soon welcomed in the durable plastic, in large part due to its resistance to light, chemicals, and corrosion, and so on, which made it a prime commodity for building structures. Further improvements were made to PVC's temperature resistance in the 1980s, and it's around that time that thousands of American homes also began incorporating the material into plumbing systems. And you get different sort of looks for PVC pipe, like some of it's very smooth bore and small, some of it's like got those ridges and they're typically a bigger diameter, but not necessarily, there's a whole mix because it is a very sort of flexible material, so to speak. In some cases, it's not very flexible to touch, but in terms of its usages, there's a lot of use cases for it. So you can now have houses that are covered in vinyl siding that have PVC pipes coming in and out for sewer and water, and they have, shelving units filled with vinyl clothing, and you have a phonograph record player playing vinyl records, and so forth. Pure PVC finds application in construction trades where its rigidity and low flammability are useful in pipe conduit siding, window frames, and door frames, in combination with plasticizer, which Rachel mentioned, sometimes in concentrations as high as 50%. It is familiar to consumers as floor tile, garden hose, imitation leather upholstery, and shower curtains. That's quoting from the Britannica entry from the Industrial Polymers page, comparing and contrasting PVC to various other industrial polymers. And we've got one more thing that we wanted to talk about on this. and that is sheet vinyl flooring. So, Rachel, could you talk a little bit about sheet vinyl flooring?
Yeah, so sheet vinyl flooring comes in large, continuous, flexible sheets that are then kind of cut down to fit the dimensions and shapes of rooms and houses. So the fact that it's a large, continuous sheet makes it impermeable to water, unlike vinyl tile or vinyl planks that interlock. So this really makes it an attractive option for kitchens, bathrooms, and like house entryways where people track in water from outside. The vinyl flooring is also highly durable, easy to install, and relatively inexpensive. And it doesn't require a lot of maintenance. It's often coated, so you don't have to wax it or anything like that. It's easy to clean. So it's just a really attractive option for housing. Sheet vinyl is often digitally printed to have skeuomorphic designs, mimicking other non-plastic surfaces like wood flooring or a tile pattern, something to make it just a little more visually interesting and attractive. However, it is pretty toxic, and it's not great if it catches on fire, or even if it's just heated before it actually catches on fire. So for firefighters, they have to be pretty well protected with a breathing apparatus, or else it's very, very dangerous to breathe in those fumes. Another disadvantage is it's not commonly recycled. It is recyclable, but most sheet vinyl just ends up in the landfill at the end of its use. Landfill vinyl releases the VOCs, such as phthalates, that can leach into the ground. Those phthalates are a certain category of plasticizer that is used to make PVC softer and flexible. And once it leaches into the ground, it can also get into water systems, and it's very toxic. This vinyl flooring is a successor to linoleum, which was itself invented between 1855 and 1864 in England during an unsuccessful attempt on a different track to synthetically replace natural rubber. So oftentimes, what is actually vinyl flooring is kind of misnamed as linoleum. But linoleum is made from linseed oil and other organic materials. Linoleum was immensely popular from about the 1860s to about the middle of the 20th century. Then it just kind of got supplanted by this vinyl flooring. Linoleum makers today would argue that they're the all-natural, eco-friendly, and biodegradable alternative to polyvinyl chloride flooring. But I think PVC has just kind of taken over the market, and just because of its cheapness, its durability, it's just a more cost-effective, attractive option for flooring. And also the interlocking vinyl panel flooring, the plank flooring, has kind of supplanted wood flooring because it's easy to clean, it's really durable as well. And it handles temperature changes better than real wood does. So the expansion and contraction doesn't compromise the durability of the material. So it's also kind of taken over in housing as well.
So, Rachel, this is potentially kind of a boring topic, and it's one that is not necessarily as interesting or exciting as some of the other ones that we've talked about on the show. But it is important to talk about, I think, because it spans a bunch of the different periods that we've been talking about on the show. It tracks with a lot of the other issues that we've been discussing. And it is something that, had a significant cost reduction effect, again, on things like housing and so forth. But it's also just all around us. And it's something we don't necessarily think about, but the physical material nature of it and the processes to create it and so forth do have a fairly profound effect on the built environment around us and even our sort of home interiors.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize also how long the lag time was before its invention and its popularization. It really did require kind of those auxiliary technological advancements to really become the material that is ubiquitous today. And it's really interesting that it took almost 100 years for the kind of the innovations to catch up to the base material itself to really kind of unlock the utility of the material. So I found that really fascinating, just the fact that it was kind of an accidental invention in a flask, and then it has just exploded into the material that is everywhere today.
And obviously, we're not doing this episode as an advertisement for the vinyl industry. I mean, we did quote some various sort of corporate documents and histories on this just because they have an obvious interest in promoting what an exciting, thrilling story it is. But as Rachel mentioned, there are all sorts of problems with, lack of recycling, lack of biodegradation, toxins leaching out, fire hazards, all kinds of challenges. Natural gas, I think, is used in the process of cracking and everything. And, we know natural gas has its own challenges and problems that are not great for our environment. But it's certainly something that, once you start thinking about it and looking around, you're going to start noticing it everywhere and thinking about it everywhere and thinking, oh, that color is because it's, plastic vinyl siding, or, this building is, I can judge that this was built in the such and such decade because of this particular type of siding versus an earlier aluminum siding or whatever. It's at least it gives you a rough ballpark on that. What are your takeaways going to be going forward from this? What are you going to be thinking about coming out of this episode?
Well, I really you don't think about the materials around you until you actually like start looking at them, and I think that's what I'm going to notice. Like plastics are everywhere, and they're a relatively recent invention. I just finished Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, and plastic is a huge part of that, and it's set in World War II. And it kind of highlights what was going on in Germany at the time, this kind of explosion of plastics and them starting to appear everywhere. And so it you see plastics, and you kind of get the sense that they've always been here, but they're actually a really relatively new invention. And I think, especially with the environmental concerns of plastics, I think people are going to be looking for the next material that is less toxic, more eco-friendly, more biodegradable, or has better options for recycling. So it's kind of interesting to think about what the next phase of material development needs to look like in the future.
And while we're on the subject, before we wrap this up, I'll just note that the book that you just referenced, Gravity's Rainbow, by Pynchon, is the book that has that long digression about the Byron the bulb, the sentient immortal light bulb, which is, as we've talked about on this show, on the January 6, 2021 episode, number 339, The Future of Planned Obsolescence, with our friend Patrick from the show Conspiracy You Can Believe In. That bulb character is based on an actual true story about early light bulb development around the same period, also in Germany, I believe it was, and that they had developed these really durable light bulbs that could last a really, really long time. And then there was a literal cartel decision by a bunch of corporations to get together and design light bulbs that didn't last as long, because having immortal light bulbs that never went out was not a good business model for them. Even though they had the technology and had proven it and tested it, that you could make extremely durable, long-lasting light bulbs. And so that, obviously, a fictionalization of that anecdote in Gravity's Rainbow that you just mentioned from 1973, but that specific aspect is based on a true story, an actual real life conspiracy that happened that we know about, that there's plenty of documentation about. So I just wanted to mention that again. If you haven't listened to that episode from this past January, it's a great one. Go check that out. Nate and I talked with Patrick about a whole bunch of different aspects around planned obsolescence and some of the challenges and things like that. And this is, interestingly, a lot of this PVC stuff is actually built to last quite a long time. Often you get like 50-year warranties on vinyl siding for houses, and you get, many, many decades of use, at least theoretically, out of PVC piping in the infrastructure, as I talked about earlier on the episode. That's one reason why it's been used as either a replacement thing or a liner on existing pipes. To like repair them inexpensively and keep them in operation without having to do a huge amount of work under the ground. But it's an interesting thing to think about, in the long term, that, the ways in which we've now, built this sort of throwaway plasticized environment, kind of. So, Rachel, thanks so much for being on this week.
It's always a pleasure.